What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Chosen Few channel. I'm your host, Matthew Daniels, the writer, author, scribe, and bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, may your name live on forever. And may your memory never die. Today, we're going to be talking about the British and Roman Empire's special relationship. That's right. I'm going to be giving you guys a little bit of information about the British Empire and the Roman Empire's special relationship. In all actuality, the people in Britain want to be Romans. Maybe not now, but in the past, they wanted to be Romans. They adopted Roman culture and they loved it. Now, in order to be talking about this, I'm going to be going to the book, The Birth of Britain, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, Volume 1 by Winston S. Churchill. Now check this out, family. Let's get into it. The British and Roman Empire's special relationship. Now, in chapter 1 of this book, page 1, sentence 1, Winston Churchill says, in the summer of the Roman year 699, now described as the year 55 before the birth of Christ, the proconsul of Gaul, Gaius Julius Caesar, turned his gaze upon Britain. I want you to pay attention to something. Winston Churchill is telling us about the birth of Britain, and he begins it, the first sentence of the first paragraph, he begins when Julius Caesar sets his eyes upon Britain. Remember, when during the reign of the Roman Empire, they conquered Britain. And I'm telling you guys about the British Empire and the Roman Empire special relationship. So take note, it's going to be important later. Take note that Winston Churchill of Britain, when discussing the birth of Britain in his work, he begins it from when Julius Caesar first set his eyes on Britain. He goes on further in this book and he says, check this out. While Caesar marched from the Rhine across northern Gaul, perhaps through Reims and Amiens to the coast, he sent an officer in a warship to spy out the island shore. And when he arrived near what is now Boulogne, or perhaps the mouth of the Somme, this captain was at hand, with other knowledgeable persons, traders, Celtic princes, and British traders to greet him. He had concentrated the forces which had beaten the Veneti in two ports or inlets nearest to Britannia, and now he awaited a suitable day for the descent. So what he is describing is the war campaign that Julius Caesar waged on the British people, right? And watch what he says in the very next sentence. What was, in fact, this island, which now for the first time in coherent history was to be linked with the great world? What he's saying is, from his perspective, Britain, his home country, was for the first time in coherent history linked to the great world by Julius Caesar preparing to invade. The British and Roman Empire's special relationship, even coming as conquerors. Yes, the British people fought, and they fought for years against the Romans, but look at Winston Churchill, who lived in the 1900s. Look at how he describes Rome from his perspective. He loves it. And so get this, we actually do have plenty of Roman records talking about the British island, talking about the people of Britain, and how Winston Churchill is talking about Julius Caesar setting his sights upon Britain. We actually have Julius Caesar himself talking about setting his sights upon Britain. This is a book I have, The Landmark Julius Caesar, where it talks about the Gallic War of Julius Caesar, the Civil War of Julius Caesar. It talks about the Alexandrian War, it talks about the African War, and it talks about the Spanish War. So in here, it talks about actual wars that Julius Caesar fought. And within it is contained some of his own personal diaries and journals and accounts of these wars. Look what he says about the people in Britain on page 140. The interior of Britain is inhabited by those who claim on the authority of their own tradition that they are native to the island, but the part along the sea by those who originally came over from Belgium for the purpose of warring and raiding. Hence, almost all of them are called by the name of the nations from which they originated before they arrived in Britain. So Julius Caesar is saying that when he encountered the people in Britain, they said that they had always been there on that island. But there were people who lived on that island with them that came from the coastland, that came from Europe itself. And they came over for purposes of warring and raiding. He goes on to say, the currency people use consists either of bronze or gold coins or of thin pieces of iron in weights of standard value instead of coins. So we see that the people on the British island, they did have their own society and civilization before the Romans got there. Now look, this is going to be real interesting. You see how Julius Caesar made the claim that the Britons claimed that they were always on that island. Look at what he says next, and I'm going to tie this back in with Winston Churchill and some actual archaeology. Julius Caesar says, of all these peoples, by far the most civilized are those who live in Cantium, which is entirely a maritime region, and they do not differ much from the Gauls in their tradition, in their customs. Most of those who dwell inland do not cultivate grain, but live on milk and meat, and clothe themselves with skins. And all the Britons tattoo themselves with woad, which produces a blue color, and this makes them look all the more terrible in battle. They wear their hair long and loose, and every part of their bodies but the head and the upper lip is shaved. 10 or 12 men share wives, brothers as well as fathers, and sons are especially likely to hold wives in common. But the children born of these parents are considered to belong to whichever house a woman was first taken to as a virgin. Now that's crazy, because later in history, everywhere the British Empire went, they called people savages. But here, when Julius Caesar, the Romans encountered him, Julius Caesar said 10 or 12 men share wives. Brothers as well as fathers and sons are especially likely to hold wives in common. But the children born of these parents are considered to belong to whichever house a woman was first taken to as a virgin. That's wild. But what I want to point out is what he said in the beginning of that paragraph. He said, of all the peoples, by far the most civilized are those who live in Cantium. Now, Cantium, family, is a place called Kent. And I'm going to show you Winston Churchill in the book The Birth of Britain. He actually quotes Julius Caesar, how I just quoted Julius Caesar. And watch what he says right here. By far the most civilized inhabitants are those living in Kent. Kent must be the modern name for Cantium. By far, the most civilized inhabitants are those living in Kent, a purely maritime district. And then he goes on to say the things that Julius Caesar says in that particular quote. But I want to show y'all something about Kent, family. Check this out. Look what he says a couple of pages before that. We have dug up in the present age from the gravel of Swanscombe. Swanscombe is in Kent. A human skull, which is certainly 250,000 years old. So Winston Churchill is talking about an archaeological find of a skull that he is saying is at least 250,000 years old, saying it is at least 250,000 years old. Now, what he's talking about, family, he's talking about this right here, the Swanscombe skull. Now, the Swanscombe skull is a human fossil remnants consisting of 3 large cranial bones of a young female found in well-stratified gravels of the River Thames at Swanscombe in Kent, England. Discovered in 1935, 1936, and 1955, the remains were dated to about 300,000 years ago by chemical test and by association with animal remains and Acheulean hand axes also found at the site. The Swanscombe skull predates the Neanderthals and is usually classified as an archaic Homo sapiens, also called Homo heidelbergensis family. So this skull that Winston Churchill is talking about is Homo heidelbergensis. So if he is connecting himself to the original inhabitants or some of the oldest inhabitants on that island, Homo heidelbergensis, these archaic humans, these early Homo sapiens sapiens, these ancestors in the evolutionary chain of Homo sapiens sapiens, these Homo heidelbergensis, then it probably was these Homo heidelbergensis that Julius Caesar was referring to when the British people said that they have always been there. If you can go back 300,000 years, especially as a not modern human, but a Homo heidelbergensis, yeah, you definitely been there forever, right? You've definitely been there forever. Now let's move further, family. The British Empire and the Roman Empire special relationship. I'm going to show you how deep the psychology of this thing goes. You all know who King Arthur is, right? This is King Arthur. Now, King Arthur was a legendary Celtic Briton who, according to medieval histories and romances, was leader of the Celtic Britons in battles against Saxon invaders of Britain in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Now, it's basically known that King Arthur is a mythological character, but in Britain, they not only hold on to the idea that he is actually real, maybe not everything about him is real, but that he is based on some type of real character. And I'm going to show you that even in the mind of Winston Churchill, this Great Britain, King Arthur, this mythological hero, they even called that man a Roman, just to show you how deep the psychology goes. Now look, in his book, when talking about King Arthur, he says, it is reasonably certain that a petty chieftain named Arthur did exist. And this is just showing him giving references, talking about that King Arthur is based off of a real person. He goes on to say, in this account, we prefer to believe that the story with Geoffrey of Monmouth, delighted the fiction-loving Europe of the 12th century is not all fancy. If we could see exactly what happened, we would find ourselves in the presence of a thing as well founded, as inspired, and as inalienable from the inheritance of mankind as the Odyssey or the Old Testament. It is all true, or it ought to be, and more and better besides. Now, what he's doing in a nutshell, he's putting this book, Geoffrey of Monmouth, the history of the kings of Britain, on the same level as the Odyssey and the Old Testament as it relates to Britain's history. And he is saying that the British people should take the history in there like the people of ancient Greece took the Odyssey, and like the Israelites take the Old Testament. He goes on to say, let us then declare that King Arthur and his noble knights, guarding the sacred flame of Christianity and the theme of a world order, sustained by valor, physical strength, and good horses and armor, slaughtered innumerable hosts of foul barbarians and set decent folk an example for all time. Let us declare that King Arthur is real. Now look what he said. The memory of Arthur carried with it the hope that a deliverer will return one day. The legend lived upon the increasing tribulations of the age. Arthur has been described as the last of the Romans. He understood Roman ideas and used them for the good of the British people. The heritage of Rome, Professor Collingwood says, lives on in many shapes. But of the men who created the heritage, Arthur was the last. And the story of Roman Britain ends with him. Now, I could stop there, and I should stop there, but I'm going to read you one last quote from Winston Churchill, and I think I will have proved my point. On page 33 in The Birth of Britain, he says clearly, we owe London to Rome. And then he goes on to say how the ancient Romans founded the city that we know as London, and they called it Londinium, and now it's called London. But we see clear we owe London to Rome. So the British and Roman Empire special relationship. I hope you guys like that. Hit me up in the comments, ask questions, leave comments, like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Hit the hit the link in the description and go and purchase one of my books if you want to support the channel. This your brother Matthew Daniels, aka I'm Pooh, aka the Chosen Few, aka the Real Bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm, world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, may your name live on forever, and may your memory, family, never die.